Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
I'm Lisa, and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 28. This summer, we wanted to have a bit of fun and move away from our normal schedule of multi-episode topics. So we've been discussing movies, including adaptations of popular books and major figures in the horror genre. So sit back, relax, and play some Slim Whitman, because today we are talking about Tim Burton's campy alien invasion flick, Mars Attacks. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start us with a kind of brief synopsis of the movie Mars Attacks for anyone out there who is not familiar with it. If you are not familiar with it, go check it out as soon as you can. Rewatching it for this episode reminded me of just how hysterically funny it really is. Mars Attacks came out the same year as Independence Day, actually, in 1996. It was directed by Tim Burton, as Lisa mentioned in the introduction, and the screenplay was originally written by Jonathan Gems, but I think later on it went through some edits from Burton and the two screenwriters from his movie Ed Wood, which we mentioned when we talked about Plan 9 from Outer Space. Basically, Mars Attacks is kind of like this, it's a parody of science fiction B movies, pretty much, but it also has a lot of satire in it, and it's a very dark comedy. Like practically, there's a lot of stars in this movie, and practically everybody dies by the end. It's pretty bleak. Now, just a brief synopsis. Basically, you're following several characters. You're in Washington, D.C. with the president. You're in Nevada, outside Las Vegas, in Las Vegas. And you have all these characters kind of coming to terms with the fact that aliens from Mars are visiting Earth. Now, we know as the viewers that the Martians are massing to attack, but the people on Earth are hoping that they're going to be friendly. So you see all the different reactions, from political reactions to religious reactions to people kind of feeling new age about it or doing different things with their lives or because this wonderful thing is happening. And even though the Martians say they came in peace, when someone releases a dove at this news, at the first meeting of the Martians and the Earthlings, the Martians incinerate the dove and then proceed to just incinerate as many people as they possibly can with their weapons. And so throughout the movie, they use many weapons, from a shrink ray at one point to these weird flamethrowers, which for some reason they're allowed to carry into Congress with them. I'm not sure why. And so everywhere the Martians go, they claim they're there in peace, but they basically kill and mutilate people. When they do their flamethrowers, people turn into skeletons that are red or green. And then they take some people back to their ship, including Pierce Brosnan's character and Sarah Jessica Parker's character, and do experiments on their bodies and those sorts of things. And basically at the end of the movie, it's just discovered quite by accident by a grandmother and her grandkid that the music of Slim Whitman, the country singer, makes the Martians' heads explode when he yodels. Seriously. And then at the end of the movie, you see the few survivors we have left kind of returning to their families, and the whole movie ends with Tom Jones singing "It's Not Unusual" triumphantly to a bunch of woodland animals who have come out of hiding because the Martians are dead. I'm not sure how much sense all that made, really, but those things actually happen in the movie and in that general order as well. Guys, do you want to jump in? We could talk a little bit about maybe background or inspiration for the movie.
Well, Mel, as you had mentioned, I'm getting tickled just thinking about scenes in this movie, but as you had mentioned, the movie was based on some trading cards that came out of 1962, and I don't think I realized that before I had started doing research for this episode. In fact, I don't think I had actually watched Mars Attacks since it came out in the theater, or maybe shortly thereafter when it came out on video. So it was a real joy to kind of go back to it. But just to give you, I think this helps put it in a little bit of perspective, the whole movie, is that in 1962, and again, this is 1962, so I would say things are pretty conservative as far as what is allowed to be shown to the general public. And these were bubblegum baseball cards that were being put out, obviously marketed to children, or children had them, I should say. And they were ultra violent, bodies being burned, bodies being mutilated. One I looked at today had a man on a table like an operating table, and these two aliens were kind of gleefully pulling out his intestines as he was screaming. So he was still alive while this was happening. And then behind him was a mostly naked woman who I will describe as being very buxom, who was caged behind them. And so that kind of tells you what the sensibility of these cards were. You know, they were just very violent. They showed gore in excess. They, you know, showed half naked women. And I can see how mothers would probably have bought these cards for their children and then suddenly gotten a look at them and were like, oh my gosh, what did I give my child? But that's actually, there are only 55 cards that were made because it came under such controversy that the Topps company said that they were going to scale back and take some of the cards that were most violent and redo them. But before they even had a chance to do that, they were completely pulled off the market. So there were only the 55 cards that were ever made. And I think they kind of became a little bit of a cult status after that. In fact, the Topps company released a commemorative book in 2012 on their 50-year anniversary, just because there were so many fans of the cards. So you can still go look at them. But that just kind of shows you where Tim Burton pulled this inspiration from, because he very much wanted to capture the look and the feel of the cards while at the same time doing kind of a parody of the sci-fi movies of the 50s and early 60s. Anyway, so that is just kind of the background of the absolute genesis of Mars Attacks. And I will say, I thought we had the trading card, I guess, business beat with our garbage pail kids in the 80s, but these look equally as gross. Anyway, so yeah. So it started off as trading cards in 1962 until Tim Burton got a hold of it.
And actually, and I'll put a link for this in the show notes, I've found a album on Flickr that has all 55 cards, so you can scroll through and view the front and backs of all of the original cards. And I'm not sure if they're photos or if they came from the book, but just worth throwing that out there. That we'll put a link in the show notes. And I did also want to say that was a big part of the reason why I actually saw this movie when it first came out, was I had a really good friend, and he knew about the trading cards things, and we were giant nerds, and we read the comic book magazine Wizard, and there was an article about Mars Attacks in it, and he lost his mind, like, this is going to be great, this is going to be so good, and I have no idea what you're talking about. And then we rented it, like, when I spent the night at his house one time, and this movie is so good.
Well, and Tim Burton, I think, was such a lover of the cards that actually part of the screenwriting credit was given to the makers of the cards. So that's just kind of a little fun fact I found scrolling through IMDb today. But, you know, the actual screenplay was done by Jonathan Gems, but they also gave writing credit to the trading card writers because of inspiration.
Well, the original take on Mars Attacks for a movie, I think, came about in 1985, and that movie was never made. And then Tim Burton kind of took that screenplay and worked with it. And Gems was very much influenced by those cards. I mean, the first movie was going to be marketed kind of as the cards. One of the things I thought was interesting looking at the cards was just how all the similarities, that the Martians actually look very similar, though people have said that the Martians' kind of bulbous heads, you know, came from the aliens in this island Earth in 1955 and possibly even War of the Worlds in 53. But the teeth and the head and the glass suit, so they can, you know, breathe their own air, the shrink ray, the large robots, the burning people into skeletons, all those sorts of things are there. So yeah, I mean, that is probably, in some ways, the cards are probably the biggest tie-in to the movie, right next to those movies that you were mentioning, Lisa.
I'm glad you mentioned this island Earth, because I mean, that kind of also ties into one of the biggest other inspirations for this film is clearly Plan 9 from Outer Space, right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that.
Yes.
Just looking at the deliberate low-budgetness in some places, the flying saucers themselves. I was watching this earlier today, and the female Martian alien it's a Martian in disguise as an Earth woman. The way she walks, there's a shot that I swear it's like straight up Vampira kind of walk. And
the actress played Vampira in the 1994 Tim Burton Ed Wood.
Yeah, it was Lisa Marie.
That's right. And so, like, there's definitely, we had talked about with Plan 9 when we did that earlier this summer as one of our summer sci-fi picks that, you know, if only Ed Wood had had studio funding. I think this is kind of a good glimpse as to what Ed Wood would have looked like with studio funding, because just in case you listeners aren't familiar or aren't aware, let's just run down some of the stars that are in this. You've got Jack Nicholson playing 2 roles, mind you. Glenn Close, Annette Bening, Pierce Brosnan, Danny DeVito, Martin Short, Sarah Jessica Parker, Michael J. Fox, Tom Jones as himself, Natalie Portman before she was really big. Let's see, Pam Grier. I mean, Jack Black even has a brief role in it. And again, this was also before he was a really well-known actor as well. But I mean, just that list of actors and actresses, it's, you know, a lot of 90s A-list people. And I mean, this is very much, I think, what would have happened if Ed Wood had, you know, been able to get a good studio budget.
Oh, I completely agree with that, Matt, because when you look at something like this, it obviously had a big budget and it was done really well, but it was almost made to look cheaper than it was. And those flying saucers that you see around, like hovering around DC, are a perfect example. And Mel, I think you had mentioned that he pulled some of those directly from some of the sci-fi movies of the 1950s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. If you ever watched that movie from 1956, where the saucers kind of close in on DC across next to all the monuments. I mean, some of the shots almost look straight from that, except you have the computer-generated saucers.
Yeah, so Pierce Brosnan, he's the voice of science in this movie, and the way they characterize him is perfect because he's got a pipe in his mouth almost throughout most of the movie, I guess, to signify his intelligence. But even the way they light him in the movie kind of goes back to those movies of the 50s and 60s, and you almost forget you're watching a movie that came out in the mid-90s. And you can especially see that in the aliens because he wanted them to look like stop motion animation. And I was surprised to learn that they actually used CGI to create the aliens, but they still had that very jerky movement and almost like a modeled clay look to them, if that makes sense. So again, yeah, somebody with a big budget, but obviously trying to do something different than just the glossy alien attack or science fiction movie of, say, like Matt, you had mentioned, it's contemporary Independence Day. Yeah, so I could definitely see this as an Ed Wood film made if Ed Wood had survived into the 90s. Yeah, I can see that.
What's really interesting to me, too, is just the little nods to the 50s and 60s sci-fi movies that they do. Like, you've already mentioned the flying saucers and Pierce Brosnan, which there's a scene where he's trying to work with the president, played by Jack Nicholson, where they're trying to work on a speech to be sent through a translator to the Martians, and he's sitting there wearing a full white lab coat while smoking his pipe, because prior to that, you know, he was just a science advisor, but now he's sciencing. But just the way these inventions look, like this universal translator that this other scientist has been working on. I mean, it looks like it fell off the set of a movie you'd see on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Like, it really does look like something from that 50s B-movie sci-fi time period, and I love those little flourishes and touches to that too, and I totally picked up on that stop motion thing that you were talking about, Lisa, especially if those of you who are planning on rewatching this after this episode, when towards the end there's a Martian and a giant robot that I swear it looks like one of those claymation things, and it's great.
Well, even the set pieces at times and the costuming are throwbacks. You know, the Situation Room is kind of portrayed as the Dr. Strangelove type 50s, 60s with clocks clocks everywhere, nothing digital. The president kind of in the center of the room. The army uniforms are all kind of throwback. And the Martians, the costumes that he put the Martians in, particularly the ambassador, vizier, whatever the heck he is, the lead Martian, with the cape. I mean, it's kind of like, it's straight out 1950s, 60s comic books of like the bad guy, you know, has the long cape and the kind of shiny material outfit. So it's taking place in the 90s, we assume, but like the music and the costuming and all that stuff you guys are mentioning is so interesting. It's not just like something Ed Wood would do. It's almost like it's an Ed Wood film in the 90s.
With English actors.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it did have almost a timeless feel to it. Like, that's one thing that I noticed. And I think part of that is because of the throwbacks to like the 60s that are kind of woven throughout. You know, a lot of the, Mel, you mentioned the costuming, but a lot of the costuming had the kind of 1960s films. I noticed on Jack Black when in the first Martian attack of the movie, he throws on a helmet, like a soldier's helmet. And it looked like something right out of like a Vietnam War movie. Prior to that scene is the scene where the aliens very first shoot. And this is, they've said they come in peace and everybody's happy. And there's this group of almost hippie looking people. And you feel like you are looking at extras from a movie in the 1960s because they are just dressed as 1960s hippies. That's the only way I can describe them. And they release a dove, you know, this international sign of peace. And that's what the aliens first shoot down. And that's when everything just, you know, the movie takes a turn at that point, I'll say. And I will say this, that the reason there are so many A-list actors is because so many of them die throughout the movie that they have to keep replenishing them. But yeah, even we mentioned Lisa Marie playing the kind of sexy seductress Martian who makes her way into she's how they infiltrate the White House, which is kind of brilliant because she gets the press secretary to take her in. But, you know, even her dress, she's wearing this like bouffant blonde hairstyle and this very tight-fitting sequin dress, and she looks like Barbarella, kind of. I mean, it is this very just 60s aesthetic, but at the same time, it's in a 90s movie, and that gives it this weird, I don't know, almost like a timeless feel. Like, I didn't feel like I was watching a movie that was made 21 years ago.
I'd say, too, with the costuming of Sarah Jessica Parker's character, she looks very much like she came straight out of the 60s too, with a lot of the bright colors and especially when she's there for the Martian, the first appearance of the Martians, she's dressed in this bright, shiny silver get-up that, I mean, it looks, again, straight out of the 60s.
Yeah, and in many ways, it is kind of a parody of these type of movies, but it's also kind of a love story to these type of movies as well. And all the things we've mentioned, but we haven't even talked about the music yet and the sound effects of this movie, which is so much fun. Of course, the score is by Danny Elfman, and it sounds like every science fiction movie you've ever watched. I mean, you know, it's very theremin heavy and a lot of do 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 do, you know, type of feel to it. But then also, we had fun watching this today, texting each other back and forth. But the sounds of the aliens.
Yes. Who wants to give an impression of the aliens? Anyone?
Oh yeah, I personally vote Matt, but we'll see.
I vote Matt as well.
If it's been a while since you've seen this, or if you've never seen this, again, you really need to see this movie. But they're basically ack, 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 and that's all they say. But it's clearly an advanced language because they are able to communicate with each other. So
yeah,
and there's evidently a kind of a debate as to where the ack came from. The editors of the screenplay said that they just threw ack in because they didn't know what kind of language the Martians would speak and they need a placeholder. And then some people have said that when they were first using the spool recorders, like the kind of 1960 type recorders to make the universal translator thing, somebody just said yak 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 as this placeholder while they were recording. But yeah, that's pretty much what the aliens say. It's like blah blah blah, but not.
Well, yeah, it is. It's their version of just, yeah. I can see how it would be a placeholder, and they just kept it, and it makes brilliant sense because these are clearly a very intelligent people. I don't know if you'd want to call them that. You know, and they have a very not only a very definite mission when they land on Earth, which is, I guess, just to annihilate everything.
Yeah, what is their mission? They act like 12-year-olds. Like, they sit around their underwear shooting things. I mean, they're hysterically funny, but they never say they want to colonize or anything. They're just rushing around the solar system, destroying things.
And they may very well be like 12-year-olds on some sort of, I don't know, like gaming mission. But no, they want to destroy everything, and they take such glee in what they're doing. And they emote so well that even though they only say one syllable, I guess, or make one sound, you know exactly what they're thinking. And I love how when they first came down and they start killing people, you know, they just have some sort of ray that essentially like melts your body, and there's only like either a green or a red skeleton left lying smoldering on the ground. But after that, they start getting really creative with how they're killing people. There was poor grandma, and when they were attempting to kill her, the ray was like comically large that they're pointing at the back of her head. I mean, they could have just taken one of those little handy dandy portable ones and shot her, but they didn't. The way they kill, and spoilers, sorry guys, but we did tell you everybody dies in this movie. But when they get the president, he kind of gets this weird like arm snake through his chest, and the general is shrunk down in this very like advanced, again, portable shrinking ray that can apparently shrink anything just so the alien could step on it like a bug. So maybe they are just 12-year-olds in their underwear. I don't know, but they're very creative in thinking of weapons of mass destruction. I mean,
they are, and they're also really good at manipulating politics and like the way people would receive them. I mean, "We come in peace" becomes a joke throughout the movie, but the president refuses to use nuclear weapons, and they just keep tricking people. He refuses to even use violence for the longest time, even when they're attacking. He's like, no, I've got to think about, my constituents, etc. Like, the people on Earth, they're not prepared. They don't even know what's going on. They're just happy and throw this party for the aliens, and the aliens are coming to kill them. And they just bop around the world, walking into anywhere they want to walk and flame-throwing everybody, to the point where they actually steal the universal translator at the end and run through the cities playing "We've come in peace, we're your friends, do not scream, stop running," just so they can kill more people. And most of the movie, the people are pretty gullible about it.
Well, let's be honest. The "We come in peace" at the end is a joke because they're chasing terrified people while yelling "We come in peace."
Yes.
Like, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie because it's just two of them carrying the translator, zapping people and saying "We come in peace." And so
that's true. That is true.
And I don't know if that is an actual like throwback. But I remember that there was some old, like, 80s sci-fi horror movie, and I think it was called "I Come in Peace" or something like that, where there was an alien that was, like, killing people, and the only English that he learned was "I come in peace," and so he would say that right before he killed people. I can't remember the actual name of that movie, but I'm wondering if Tim Burton was aware of it and threw that in there as a little, like, nod to that, because just that idea of "we're going to chase you around while screaming "I come in peace" and zapping you is just hysterical.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. Well, and plus the human, Pierce Brosnan keeps telling everybody that if they're advanced, then they must be peaceful. And so he justifies all their violent behavior. And so a couple nights ago, I watched the 1953 version of War of the Worlds. And as soon as the Martians appear, they've used a flamethrower to kill some people. And the scientist is like, "But they're so advanced. They must be peaceful." And I'm like, no, have you not learned anything, people? Because these aliens maybe have advanced technology, but yeah, like Lisa and I were saying, they're just like cruising around, burning things up. So they're not peaceful.
Well, it's like you said, Mel, that, they go a step beyond not being peaceful, because there's this one scene that I love in the movie where they're going to all the world leaders and basically negotiating like peace treaties. They sit down with France and they negotiate this big peace treaty, and it's this picture perfect moment, and then again they just gleefully destroy everybody in the room. And I thought, why even go through that? Like, you're already in the room with them. Why you have to go through that? Before they annihilate Congress, they have to give a speech that everybody will like cheer about, and then they'll destroy everything. So it does kind of make you wonder what their society is like and who these people actually are.
It's such a fun, campy, weird little thing. Like, I kept going through my head as I was watching this earlier today that I don't know that this movie would or could be made like today. Like I agree with you, Lisa, that in a lot of ways it does feel timeless, because it doesn't feel like a typical 90s movie, whatever that might mean. But at the same time, I don't know that any major studio would give somebody the kind of funding to make this, I mean, maybe somebody with a name like Tim Burton, because he was coming off of the 2 Batman movies, which I honestly think sort of Batman Returns is a big bridge into this movie, because that movie is such a throwback to like the campy 60s Batman in a lot of ways. But I just don't know that this movie could be made today. And that, I don't know, it just kind of makes me sad thinking about that.
No, I completely agree. And I don't think, not only could a movie like this not get made today, I don't think if by some chance like a Tim Burton did get it made, I don't think it could get this kind of cast assembled again. He might be able to pull in a few of his, kind of normal actors, I guess, but I don't think there's no way that you would have that long list of stars attached, because especially like we've barely talked about it really, Jack Nicholson and his double roles. He plays the president of the United States, which is a pretty much straightforward Jack Nicholson role, but then he's almost unrecognizable as this wealthy Las Vegas casino. I don't know if he's an owner or if he's a criminal. I don't know what he was, to tell you the truth.
I think he's one of those, like, he's a shady kind of Las Vegas wannabe. Like he wants to be a casino owner, but he's not yet. And so he's always garishly dressed and talks a lot of talk, but doesn't have the money to back it up. And so that's why, like, in his last scene in that particular role, he's meeting with like the sheiks and the other like rich people, trying to pitch them the idea of opening up a casino that he would run. But yeah,
that's right.
I would actually back up and say, I think, because I was thinking of like the movie Black Dynamite that came out 5 or 6 years ago, which was a spoof on 70s blaxploitation movies, which is probably the closest you could get to something like Mars Attacks today. But that wasn't something that was widely released. It had a limited release and then came out pretty quickly on DVD and rent. So I just can't see Mars Attacks like because it had a widescreen release. It was in a lot of theaters. But sorry, I don't want to keep banging that drum. Let's talk about Jack Nicholson.
Well, no. So Jack Nicholson, he just seemed to be having fun. I mean, that's all I'll say about this. He seemed to really be having fun in this role. You watch some movies that have these big casts and a lot of stars attached to it, and I almost don't even want to see the movie when I find out that it has too many stars attached to it, because I feel like, oh my gosh, this is just, they're all getting together and they're going to kind of phone it in knowing they'll get a big paycheck at the end of the day. And this is not what this felt like. This felt like Tim Burton had a vision and everybody else just wanted to be a part of it, and everybody else was having a really great time. I don't know if he had intended for Jack Nicholson to play both roles. I couldn't find that in my research. I did see that, I guess, the Michael J. Fox role was originally written for Johnny Depp, which I'm kind of glad it went to Michael J. Fox. But yeah, they all just seem to be just enjoying it so much. And I think that's what made it a fun movie to watch. Yeah.
Well, in a Mental Floss article, they talk about how at first they had some issues getting a lot of stars because, one, people didn't want to like die so soon, possibly, since so many people were dying. And they also didn't quite know, like, I mean, if you have an ensemble, then you're kind of, you're having maybe a lesser role or something. But I think the the cool part of the movie is it really does turn into an ensemble. And one of the things they mentioned in the Mental Floss article is that after Jack Nicholson signed on, then more people started signing on. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there's kind of a cause and effect relationship with that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, once they get that ensemble cast, like everybody just seems to be having fun with it. And I think that's one of the joys of watching the movie is that just makes it more fun.
Yes, like the actors, like y'all both said, they really do seem to be having fun. I mean, Nicholson just chews the scenery as both of those characters. I mean, his last sort of speech as the president is really, I don't know, it's just really good. And so, like, the whole time when he's the Las Vegas whatever he is person, like, that's just a fantastic performance. And a lot of them, like especially Pierce Brosnan and Sarah Jessica Parker, after they've both been abducted by the aliens, are, you know, they're being subjected to these weird experiments where they're, like, Sarah Jessica Parker's head has been attached to the body of her chihuahua and Pierce Brosnan's head has been completely removed, and they're confessing their love to each other even though they only met once on her talk show, if I remember it right. Like, it's, I mean, but they're clearly having so much fun. It's just, yeah.
Well, you know, that's a perfect example because I wanted to talk about that scene a little bit. If y'all have not seen the movie and you want to know just when we say campy and weird and fun, I think this is the perfect example of this because this could have gone very badly. You have a woman's head on a chihuahua's body, and it's perfect because her personality up to that point, I think, kind of is the embodiment of a chihuahua. She's very overly excitable. She's seen jumping up and down a lot and kind of making noise. And yeah, it just is perfect. But she, even though she had a boyfriend, or I guess a significant other, in the movie played by Michael J. Fox, she meets Pierce Brosnan's character, who is this, you know, intellectual scientist type, but very debonair and handsome. And for some reason, he goes on her talk show, even though she apparently normally just talks fashion on her show. And there's this moment where their eyes kind of meet and they fall in love, which they only confess to each other when she is on the spaceship with her head sewn on the body of a chihuahua. He is bodiless, and he is essentially just a head hanging there. They've even got the nice, I don't think I noticed this the first time I watched the movie, but as he's hanging there, you see the blood dripping from his neck stump, I guess is what you would call it. So this is just to set up. She, again, body of a chihuahua. He is a bodiless head, dripping blood. And they confess their love for each other, and it's a very sweet moment. There's even a kiss with the swelling romantic music behind it. And I think if it had been in anybody else's hands other than, you know, under Tim Burton's direction and with lesser actors, it would have been a horrible, horrible mistake to film that scene. But it comes out just, I don't know. That's the big love story in the middle of the science fiction movie, and they're essentially just two heads. I can't even explain it.
Well, and because they're just heads, the only way they can kiss is when the ship is crashing and they're probably going to die and they happen to roll into each other. And I have to say, I was kind of rooting for them, you know, when the ship was crashing to get to have that kiss for some reason, even though it was the most macabre, like, disturbing scene. I was still happy that they got to have that.
Well, wait. I agree with you, but let's back up there. You said they're probably going to die. They have no bodies anymore, and they are on a spaceship.
Alive at that point and talking to each other.
You know, Martian magic. But they are on a ship that is now crashing. I think it crashes into water of some kind. I don't remember if it was a lake or an ocean or what. And I'm thinking, well, at least they got in a really good kiss before they're going to drown as bodiless heads. But you know.
Well, she has a dog's body. She might be able to dog paddle to the coast and it'll be okay.
Yeah. I feel like at that point her head had popped off, but maybe I'm just remembering.
Oh, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
it didn't look like it was held on very well. It was like very, it looks like big staples, basically. So I don't know what they were doing, but it didn't look like they took their time.
Well, they were 12 or 13-year-old Martians on a spree. They didn't really have time to do science properly, so.
Yeah. And I was just wondering why. I mean, obviously we love this movie. I think all three of us will say this movie has a special place in our hearts. I was surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be now that we've just had that conversation, that it got bad reviews. Like, there were a lot of people who did not like this movie when it came out.
It reminded me of all the apocalypse stuff we talked about in our apocalypse series. Because, I mean, there's 10 people left or something in the world. And they're but it's funny. I mean,
there are so few people left in the world that, as you mentioned, I think it was you or maybe Matt, I don't remember now, at the beginning of this episode, that Tom Jones, when he comes out of hiding, there are no more people around him. There are just woodland animals who come and greet him as he's singing.
Oh, there were a couple of other people.
Well, the people he was hiding with.
Yeah.
And then Lucas Haas, his character, received the Medal of Honor, but there was nobody left to give it to him except for Natalie Portman, who played the president's daughter. So she kind of stepped in to fill that role. And they had to have a mariachi band play the national anthem because I guess the idea was that there was nobody else around to do it. So it was this kind of thrown together ceremony of the survivors who was left. And he had this grand idea that if we can rebuild society and we can make it better. You know, we can learn from our mistakes, which is a very common trope in these kind of apocalyptic, sci-fi movies. But then his idea to make things better was maybe we don't build houses and maybe we all sleep in teepees, which was another one of those just the humor in this movie is so good. It's all different kinds. So I kind of feel like there's something for everybody. And one thing that I did think was missing watching this time, we've talked about all of our apocalyptic kind of sci-fi of the 50s and 60s in previous episodes, and how they were definitely tied to the atomic age or these kind of like nuclear fears that the broader public had about, that we've created these weapons of mass destruction and we could possibly do this to ourselves if we're not careful. This did not, and I don't know if it was because it was made in the 90s, but this did not have that same sort of, we're preying on societal fears here. It was just aliens are attacking and we're going to have a lot of fun with it. So there wasn't that same type of anxiety that ran through it. And again, I don't know if that was because it was made in the 90s or if it was because it was made to be a parody of sorts. But that was one thing that I thought was really interesting.
Well, I mean, especially since in the Topps cards, the way the Earth people fight back is by using nuclear weapons on Mars, which Mars was going to explode evidently at the end of that series anyway, but they just kind of do that and then kind of fight back. And I thought that was interesting too. I mean, the Topps cards are from the 1960s, so it kind of makes sense that would be in there. One of the things I was thinking about with that is you do have the Situation Room, thing in the Mars Attacks movie that I mentioned earlier. And there's the one general who always wants to use force, no matter what the Martians are doing, even when people think that they're okay. And even at the very end, the Jack Nicholson character will not sign the final order to use the nuclear weapons against the Martians. He tries his campaign speech kind of thing, like, we can do this together, let's just get along. And then the Martians kill him and they laugh about his speech after they act like they're going to make a bargain with him. And I don't know, I'm not saying that this is like a theme of the movie or was even intended, but I almost kind of felt like it was almost the complete opposite of the 60s. It's like, we have these weapons, but we're going to keep trying to work with them, but the Martians just can't be worked with. And I don't know what that means. And then the other thing I was thinking is like, I don't know. I almost feel like the movie might work even today, because I think we talked in one of our zombie episodes about, the idea of like a zombie apocalypse happening and people being too busy to look up from their phones or not realizing that the people are actually zombies before it's too late. And I kind of wondered about that too. Like the whole movie, they're not really understanding that civilization is falling apart. They're just doing the same old things. For example, when they're in the White House and early in the movie, the president's daughter tries to walk to a different part of the house to get away from her parents. And they're like, you can't go in there. There's a tour going on. Well, when the Martians finally turn completely evil, they lay siege to the White House. And so Glenn Close, as the first lady, is like, we should go this way. It's faster to get to the secure place. And the guy says, no, you can't go in there. There's a tour going on. And they're like still giving history tours of the White House while the whole place is just being completely destroyed. And then you have the two kids who defend the president because they played video games. And like, there's this complete parodic, like satiric absurdity to the way we handle everything. It's like we don't even realize the apocalypse is happening until it's going, and we survive by accident.
That is such a good point, Mel, because I had actually written it down in my notes when I was watching it again for this episode, and it was the scene where there's like a Boy Scout troop walking through Washington, D.C., and this is after the aliens have already landed and after they've already proven themselves to be hostile. And I thought, who takes their Boy Scouts on a tour of Washington, D.C. when there are aliens attacking? It's exactly that. It's like the tour groups going through the White House because, yeah, it's just so absurd. And you think, are these people are they really that unobservant that they're going to think this is a good idea? And I'm so glad you brought up the two boys who are playing video games, because I do remember that being a big source of anxiety in the 90s was, how much time playing video games is acceptable for a child. I know my parents watched our Nintendo time like hawks when we were kids. And there's that fear. I think Pam Grier plays the mom, and she has this fear about her kids like skipping school and playing video games and kind of going down the wrong path. And the video game they're always playing actually looks like a video game version of the Mars Attacks Topps baseball cards. It kind of looks like a version of that, and that's how they know how to defeat them, because they've been playing this Martian video game, which I thought was kind of a nice. So even though it wasn't a grand sweeping, like we're going to skewer society, I guess it was still there in kind of a fun way.
I also just love that part at the end when the house that she lives in with her kids like has been completely ripped in half. And there's just like two rooms and you look out, but you don't realize that. And she's like, come on, kids, I can't fix this place by myself. And she has like a bottle of Windex and they just like roll a dead Martian off the couch and it's like supposed to be fixed. But you can see through their house to like the whole rest of the city. I don't know why, but that just tickled me.
Right. Yeah. Well, you do kind of feel it's one of those great, I guess, cinematic moments, if you want to call it that, where the scene is very close in, and you do just see her cleaning, and you think, okay, things have gone back to normal. It's the mom getting onto her kids, saying, help me around the house, and she's cleaning, and it just looks like a little bit of dust at first, and then it just kind of pans back, and you see the alien body, and you see them push it, and then it pans back even more, and you realize that the entire facade of the building is gone. And it's like this dollhouse now where you can see into everybody's individual apartments, and everybody's doing the exact same thing. Everybody's like, let's just clean up a little bit of this dust and we'll get things back to normal. And yeah, it is a very funny scene.
And hopefully no other aliens will come bother them.
Yeah, nobody seems concerned about that. It's like after they figure out the Slim Whitman trick, they're like, okay, we've got this solved. And they've all got this like Tom Jones optimism about them, like, hey, we're done. I mean, I would be worried about more Martians coming, because apparently they only blew up the ones that were hovering around Earth. I mean, surely there are more left behind, but that's not a concern, I guess.
The movie's over, so
yeah,
there's no more attacks.
Happy ending.
Well, that's probably a good place to end this. So thanks for listening as we dive deep into the wonderfully campy incredibly insane, star-studded event that was Mars Attacks.
Well, our next episode in a couple weeks is going to be another Master of Horror, our last Master of Horror for the summer, and it's going to be the one that hopefully you were able to vote for through our social media, and we are very much looking forward to it. We'll talk to you soon.
This is the No Fear Podcast. You can find us online at Twitter and Instagram at No Fearcast. That's KNOW Fearcast. Or our website, nofearcast.com. If you want to contact us, send us an email at nofearcast@gmail.com. Download us through iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Or you can support us on Patreon. Supporters get special perks, such as early access to our main episodes and exclusive mini-episodes, released in the weeks in between our normal schedule, depending on the tier you choose. Even a little bit makes a big difference. The No Fear Cast. We know what scares you. This is a personal project and not related to any academic institution.